I still don't. Oh. Did Jerry join us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yay. Okay. So I think we have Ashley, Jerry, and Uri, right? Okay. I see some heads nodding. So I guess we can get started since we're a little bit past 1 and I did a horrible job keeping folks on time. The last time I did this, I'm not saying it's going to be any better this time, but good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's Commissioner Katie Surface from the Pennsylvania PUC. I'm happy to moderate this panel, which focuses on emerging supply and demand side solutions. We have a dynamic panel with us today. So today with us, we have Ashley Duckman, the Managing Director of Policy and Strategy with the American Gas Association, Jerry Joseph, the Executive Director of Customer Experience with Energir, and Uri Friedman, the Senior Director of Business Development with Southern California Gas Company. So potential key points, I think you saw the email invite that we might cover this session include alternative supply side solutions like certified natural gas, renewable natural gas, hydrogen, electrification like heat pumps. We're going to talk about potential of customer side solutions like gas demand response, efficient appliances, and so on, greenhouse gas emissions impacts, and regulatory frameworks that we might need for these alternative solutions. I'm obligated to say that the panel presentation will be recorded. You saw that the recording has started, and eventually this will be uploaded to our dedicated task force website. The recording will stop for the Q&A and the members only conversation thereafter. And then for the purposes of our panelists, after the Q&A, we will politely excuse you with our offers of gratitude and thanks. So we can partake in a commissioner free-flowing conversation. That part will not be recorded. And we have commissioners Carry On from Michigan and Van Ostrand from Massachusetts who are happy to start us off on that portion. So if I haven't missed anything, and if our panelists and folks from NARUC in the Brattle group are ready, I can get started. So I would like each panelist to please introduce him or herself before going into your presentation. I will try to watch the clock, but like I said, I did a horrible job doing that last time. So if you can help me with that and keep your time, kind of at like 15 minutes-ish, I would greatly appreciate that. And we're going to get started, and we are going to start with Ashley Duckman.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Surface, also Commissioner Johnson. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thanks to NARUC and the NARUC staff that's on, and of course to Brattle for bringing me into this conversation. My name is Ashley Duckman. I'm the Policy and Strategy Managing Director here at AGA. Though I have been back at AGA for about a year now, I actually have been non-consecutively here for about 15 years. I started with AGA in 2010 and spent the beginning part of my year, about a decade, a little over a decade, working on the state affairs team, doing state rate, regulatory, and legislative work. So NARUC was my beat at that time. If you're familiar with Dan Lopato, I was Dan before Dan was Dan at NARUC. And I'm delighted to be back with this group. Some of the best memories on the road I have are at NARUC meetings. So I have about 900 million things to put into a 15-minute presentation. Each one of these topic areas that Commissioner Surface ran through could be a 20 to 30 to an hour presentation in themselves. So I'm going to cruise through a lot of this content very quickly, staying fairly high level. But of course, AGA and the experts on our team are happy to dive deeper into any one of these topic areas and provide more data and information as appropriate. Next slide, please. So why are we here, and why are we talking about the future of gas infrastructure, of gas utilities, and about the supply and demand side solutions that inform how we look at the future? First and foremost, I should go without saying, and I want to just be clear that AGA and its members acknowledge this, that climate change is a defining challenge for our time, and addressing climate change, transitioning our economy while maintaining economic and energy security, and meeting decarbon emission goals are clearly going to require fundamental changes in energy use throughout all of our systems. In 2020, to that end, and in acknowledgement of that, the AGA Board of Directors approved a climate change commitment on behalf of the natural gas utility industry. It's titled Climate Change Position Statement. You see the graphic there. It is linked on our website. I'm not going to go through each one of the 10 collective commitments that were promulgated through that document, through that policy statement, but each of the articulated 10 collective commitments outline steps toward achieving a significantly lower carbon energy economy. So I'd encourage, I believe I sent around resources in advance, but there's also a link to this at the end of my slide deck that's also available to you to review. That commitment also included 8 principles for policy action, which we'll get to later in my presentation. Next slide, please. Oh, there you go. And so before I continue, this is another level set slide that I always like to begin my presentations on our decarbonization strategies with, and that is that, the gas utility industry really does truly have a history of innovation. From scarcity in the middle part of the last century, to the shale gale and abundance. The industry's been around for the better part of 150 years, and there have been many challenges and many opportunities along the way. But the one thing that this industry has consistently done is provide solutions to our nation's most pressing energy needs with a commitment and with the focus on customers and community and affordability, of course, underpinning that as the hallmark of the way that we operate in the energy sphere. And the utility industry, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this in every presentation that I give, takes very seriously its obligation to serve safe, reliable, affordable energy to our customers. Next slide, please. So what's driving this focus on the role of gas and gas infrastructure in our energy future? Some of those things are presented here on this slide. All of them together are likely the foundation that brought this NARUC task group together, from sort of state-driven climate laws and greenhouse gas reduction targets to future of gas proceedings occurring in 12 or 13 states around the country, to LDCs themselves promulgating emission reduction goals within their own companies for any number of reasons. Of course, on the not carrot, the stick side, gas bans and electrification mandates certainly come into play, as well as significant federal legislation over the past 2 years that's driving some of this, the IIJA and Inflation Reduction Act. It's important that I mention here, I think, that as we are considering strategies, as we as energy stakeholders and policymakers are considering strategies to meet economy-wide net zero emission targets, electrification has been the buzzword, right? And many stakeholders have sought to mandate electrification of customer end uses, sometimes with limited or siloed evaluation of the costs, challenges, risks. And the goal of my presentation today, and sort of going through the supply and demand side solutions that I'm going to present to you, is to really show that, there are many, many opportunities to be assessed for decarbonization and emission reduction across our existing natural gas value chain. And in addition to that, the natural gas value chain, and specifically distribution infrastructure, and the role that LDCs play in this as a cog in this whole wheel, are really significant, and they are some of the low-hanging fruit for meeting our emission reduction target. And the gas utility industry, which I'll talk through as I go through this presentation, really is wholly committed to moving forward in that direction in a positive way and being a real seat at the table as it relates to energy planning in the future. Next slide, please. So to further understanding of, we say, gas utilities can play a role in a net zero future. Great. What does that mean? Do we really understand the hows and the whys? And do we have the data and analytical support to be able to go out and say that, to be able to engage policymakers like yourselves credibly when we say that gas really can help us achieve our decarbonization and emission reduction goals in a quick, affordable way? In order to further our understanding of that at AGA and to further advance our emission reduction contributions, we commissioned a study with ICF in 2022 to provide a comprehensive and rigorous analysis to demonstrate one, that it's possible, but more importantly, the pathways and benefits of gas infrastructure in advancing decarbonization solutions. It's likely that the NARUC audience has seen this before when it first came out. I want to revisit it for a lot of reasons, but really this piece of work, this body of work, this study and all the appendices and data analytics that went into it really underpin and serve as the roadmap for the gas utility industry as we're looking at each of these pathways or demand supply side solutions, as you all characterize them, on a moving forward basis. So essentially, this study provides an illustration of several possible pathways that combine different technologies and approaches to net zero emissions by 2050, of course, with a focus on opportunities to reduce GHG within the gas utilities purview, within sort of our bubble. The study also set out to identify and explore the policy and regulatory actions that would be needed to accelerate net zero ambition through gas infrastructure and technologies, while recognizing, of course, that there is no one size fits all approach. This is not intended to be prescriptive. Certainly, regions of the country will require different solutions based on any number of inputs, which the NARUC audience is keenly aware of. Next slide, please. So what are the gas utility approaches to reducing emissions? This schematic is one of my favorites because it really nicely encapsulates sort of all the tools in the toolbox currently available to us as gas utilities, either ready today, in action today, or being developed for the future. This, we're going to go into some of these very quickly, including certified gas, low carbon fuels, demand options like efficiency and integration of new technology. But I put this here because it really is the best summary of that toolkit that our members are using. And we really look at it sort of as a pie, with that center as the pie. Each piece of that pie and how utilities and their regulatory commissioners and their legislatures within their state or their region will choose to make each piece of this pie the size that is appropriate for all those factors that you know are different across states, jurisdictions, even utility footprints. So a good one to snapshot and one that I carry around in my back pocket when I'm talking about the pathways. Next slide, please. So before we get into those solutions, sort of another level set slide here, really critical part of why we are moving in this direction and to level set and provide a foundation for our conversation is to understand the role of gas in our energy system. And we all know that it's a core component and that customers and policymakers value it because it is affordable, it is flexible, is reliable, is resilient. In fact, more than 50% of American households are currently utilizing natural gas as a heating fuel, and reliance on gas is even higher in many of the colder regions of the country. So I think in the important part of this slide and the important part of this portion of my presentation is that the understanding that the scale of our economy's dependence on natural gas currently highlights the crucial role that gas infrastructure should play, can play, will play on any pathway to net zero. But also, at the same token, it's an and. It will play a very important role, and we can address greenhouse gas emissions, methane and CO2, and accelerate the reduction of those emissions on our system as we move forward and as we think about a clean energy transition. Very much an and in this conversation as opposed to an or. Because gas is important doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing more to reduce emissions. Certainly, that is something that the gas utility industry has been committed to and will continue to be committed to moving forward. And how we pull the levers for sort of regulatory, policy, legislative, whatever it may be, to accelerate those reductions are what we're looking at for the future. Next slide, please. Let me just say one more thing. Don't just take my word for it, by the way. This presentation was very aptly timed because the National Petroleum Council, as you may have seen, released 2 studies yesterday. One of them, the Charting the Course study, which addresses greenhouse gas emission reduction across the natural gas value chain, had a lot of outputs, right? There are lots of key findings and recommendations in that study, but I think the one that I take away and sort of the highest level takeaway from that report is that the National Petroleum Council, which, as you're aware, is a federal advisory committee to DOE, acknowledge the positive transformative role that abundant and affordable U.S. natural gas plays in our global energy, economy, security, environment. It's a crucial part of global and domestic security, and therefore needs to remain part of our clean energy transition conversations. It additionally identified the industry's potential to significantly reduce methane emissions through technology and innovation. So, I used to go on the stump and give this presentation, and now I have this new wind in my sail after yesterday's announcement to be able to say, don't just take my word for it. The National Petroleum Council has put it in writing as well. And thank you, Kara, for dropping them in the chat. The other study that was released yesterday was on harnessing hydrogen. Not going to spend as much time on that one. Really focused in my presentation today on greenhouse gas emission reduction through some of these solutions I'm going to go through. So this slide is one of my favorite sentences of the executive summary. It's a pullout, it's a call out, and something that I think is important to remember. And that is that the ability of our infrastructure, particularly solutions aside, we're going to get into those on the supply and demand side, but the ability of our distribution infrastructure to store and transport large amounts of energy to meet seasonal and peak day energy use is really, truly an important and valuable resource in itself that we shouldn't be ignoring when we're building these pathways. And I heard it said at a presentation several weeks ago that it really should be thought of. The gas utility infrastructure system should really be thought of as a best battery, right? I mean, it is what we leverage when we're talking about meeting seasonal and peak day demand, and we should look at it as such and acknowledge it as the resource that it is, while building our pathways to achieving net zero emissions. Of course, as I mentioned, the approaches are going to vary by region and utility. Nothing that I'm saying here is intended to provide a precise roadmap, just to illustrate the potential at the end of the pipeline to be able to implement gas tech to support deep reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. Supply side solutions. All right, so now I'm going to get into some of the pathways. The schematic, the bubble graph that I introduced at the beginning of my deck lists a whole lot of them. I'm going to tackle just a few that Josh and Brattle asked me to dig into. I'm going to go really quickly. Like I mentioned, each of them in and of themselves are a 25-minute presentation plus. So forgive me for the high level at which I tackle this, but next slide, please. First, let's talk about low carbon fuels, particularly RNG and hydrogen. In the net zero pathway study that we did with ICF, what was clear through the analysis is that any pathway to meeting net zero is going to require increases in low carbon gases. And by that, we mean renewable natural gas and hydrogen. And all production that can be brought online in both of those will be needed. The analysis that ICF did for us also showed that the natural gas utility industry can help aggressively develop these resources in the coming years. And this is really in taking a parallel approach to what electric utilities and some of my combo members are working on to develop, in the same way they're working to develop emissions-free electricity quickly. Really quickly give you a landscape of RNG and where we are. There's a lot of activity happening here right now for a number of reasons. Approximately 37 states at this moment, maybe one or two more, have some level of activity promoting the use of renewable natural gas in the residential or commercial sector, and that's enabled either through legislative, regulatory, or utility-led action. I don't include that number, RNG interconnection activity. 18 utilities have or are developing tariffs related to bringing RNG onto their systems. Again, all this information available through AGA Resource Guide. If it is of interest, we can give you the details on those numbers and how gas utilities specifically are tackling this. They all do it slightly differently, but the other big component of RNG, resurgence of RNG interest is federal activity driven by the Inflation Reduction Act. The IRA included an extension of, an expansion of several tax credits and incentive programs for the development of clean energy projects, one of which was the expansion of Section 48, the investment tax credit, to include qualified biogas projects that begin construction before 2025. Essentially, this expansion allows for any system generating biogas for purposes other than generating electricity, including the sale of RNG, to be injected into the pipeline to benefit from federal tax credit. So This is a really exciting and important federal driver for why we're seeing an uptick in the amount of RNG coming online in the last year or two, and of course, moving into the future. I know that Uri from SoCalGas is on. He's going to spend a bunch of time talking about hydrogen, so I won't dig too deeply in there. Utility engagement on hydrogen in the hydrogen space has been increasing over the last several years. Again, same reasons. The way that utilities are entering the hydrogen space varies from production to exploring purpose-built infrastructure. Of course, looking at blending has gotten increasing attention over the last several years. Understanding the safety and operational implications of blending hydrogen onto the system are research and development projects that have been underway for a few years. We have members doing pilot projects on closed loop or test systems to really best understand how blending hydrogen at various percentages will impact safety, operations, customer experience, et cetera. Gas utilities are also engaged in hydrogen hubs that have been a key pillar of the Biden strategy to advance this nascent industry. In fact, 17 utilities have some level of engagement in the hubs that were announced, and additional federal activity, including Section 45V of the IRA, which is, as you know, still in flux at the moment, as well as $1 billion that have been set aside to create a demand side mechanism for hydrogen, are also key elements driving this for gas utilities. Next slide, please. Also, critical part of the supply side addressing emission reduction is certified or differentiated gas. It's gained quite a bit of attention over the last several years with the proliferation of groups and third-party validators, with support from all parts of the value chain toward this. Cert gas, which we also had referred to as differentiated gas or responsibly sourced gas, is production that has undergone third-party certification of its performance against certain environmental, social, and governance metrics, with a very heavy emphasis on having lower methane emissions. The US at the federal level has yet to coalesce around a single standard for certifying gas. Last year, in fact, DOE indicated it didn't plan to pursue one at that time, instead opting to work toward what it calls a common approach to tracking emissions across the value chain, thinking about things like Subpart W, et cetera. The numbers that I have in terms of how much certified gas is making its way through the system, the most recent numbers that I have that are solid are year-end 2022, in which 14% of all production came from certified sources. Certainly that number increased slightly in 2023, although I hesitate to give you a percentage for a number of reasons, but that should be available by the middle of this year. Several of, as you probably are aware, they probably presented to NARUC, and I know NARUC put out a great paper on certified gas. There are several third-party validators and entities out there, each one with its own unique methodology. Gas utilities working directly with them. Of course, our partners upstream working directly with them toward advancing certified gas in the marketplace. And I think that there's nowhere to go but up from here. We're going to build on that 14%, and you're seeing a growing number of gas utilities at downstream looking at certified gas as a mechanism to meet their decarbonization goals. I don't have a slide on this, but I put it here. I think the other thing that, and this sort of sits at the juxtaposition between some supply and demand, there's really growing interest across our membership in geothermal, particularly in the Northeast. And so there's a lot of exciting things happening and a lot of great pilots that gas utilities have promulgated as it relates to geothermal. Massachusetts and New York jumped to mind. I saw that we have a Massachusetts representative on the call. Maryland recently passed legislation. So were I to give you this presentation next year, I'm positive I would have a geothermal slide with lots of great information for you about how effective and how they're sort of meeting the challenges that geothermal presents itself, not the least of which, of course, is the cost of it. Next slide, please. All right, I don't even know. I hope I'm not going over time. I'll try to go as quickly as I can. So demand side options, next slide, please. The easiest one to tackle, energy efficiency, the low hanging fruit. Improvements in energy efficiency are really the lowest cost approach to reducing emissions and they pack a big punch. They can have a significant impact to reducing emissions while offering a range of benefits to consumers, not the least of which is reduced bills and increased comfort. According to our 2020 energy efficiency report, which we do every year with the Consortium for Energy Efficiency, gas utilities through their programs help customers save about 259 trillion BTU and offset 13.7 million metric tons of CO2 from 2012 to 2020, just in energy efficiency investments alone. LBNL actually did a 2020 report that showed the average overall levelized program cost of saved natural gas was 40 cents per therm across nearly 37 utilities and program administrators. So the level of cost effectiveness is difficult to match through non-efficiency approaches to gas demand reduction. So, I mean, we really view this one on the demand side as the lowest hanging fruit. Lots of energy efficiency, natural gas efficiency programs already in place. There's room for investment there. And I think you'll start seeing some of the numbers as it relates to utility investments in this through our regular survey and reporting grow as folks figure out, as our members sort of figure out what does efficiency look like now, given sort of supply, demand, cost in a clean energy transition. There's really a reimagining of how gas utilities are undertaking efficiency programs. And I should say the American Gas Foundation is currently in the middle of a study on sort of what is that reimagining of gas utility programs. So exciting things coming from that effort that should be available to the NARUC community by the fall. Next slide, please. I know that Jerry's going to spend some time talking about dual fuel hybrid, so I won't go too deeply into it. I have a whole lot of notes here about what dual fuel is. I'm not going to read through them. Suffice it to say that our members are becoming keenly interested in hybrid gas electric heating and partnerships to provide space heating through the use of an electric air source heat pump, sort of how we are looking at optimizing energy consumption through this kind of partnership is really exciting. You see a graphic there of how dual fuel works. I don't want to preempt Jerry's exciting presentation on dual fuel. So I will just say that, you know, again, like geothermal, this is another emerging area of interest for AGA's membership. We're going to be hosting our Climate and Sustainability Committee meeting next month. This is a key feature of that. We are working closely with GTI and its emerging technology program to better understand the opportunities for gas utilities to partner with their electric side and/or another electric utility to offer these kinds of incentives and programs. Next slide, please. Before I move on, just on the technology front, I didn't do a separate slide on them, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the elusive gas heat pump. As you know, gas heat pumps they're widely available and utilized in the commercial sector. And we're starting to see promising commercialization progress in the residential sector, definitely in Canada. There's a lot of progress in Canada as it relates to putting gas heat pumps in the residential space. Gas heat pumps use thermal energy to drive the refrigeration cycle. They provide space heating and cooling, water heating, et cetera. And because they move heat rather than relying solely on combustion, they have efficiencies of more than 100%. So exciting opportunities there. Certainly, we'd like to see more commercializations of these in the residential sector. But AGA and our members, along with GTI and other partners, the North American Gas Heat Pump Collaborative, for example, are working toward figuring out how we can get more market deployment and utilization in the residential sector in particularly cold climates. But
so Ashley, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I think we're getting like a little bit like long on time. Like, I don't know how many slides you have left or
I can hit these last two really quickly. I promise. Okay. Next slide, please. I'll just say, you know, after the ICF study, I talked about regulatory and policy barriers. I would encourage you to look at the American Gas Foundation Commission study that addresses some of the regulatory challenges to advancing these solutions. I have some notes here, but it's linked at the end of my slide deck and it's pretty self-explanatory. So I'll just go next slide, please. And then the one after that. So I just want to leave you with the notion that, you know, all of these solutions exist, all of the tools in the toolkit exist, but any comprehensive decarbonization scenario has to consider that peak space heat heating load is currently served by natural gas is significantly higher than the electrical system in most regions. And that goes back to my first point, or one of my first slides, which was we really need to understand the value that the infrastructure itself plays in our clean energy transition. And so I know that there's lots of conversation at NARUC and beyond in legislatures across the country about why invest in infrastructure. Truly investing in gas infrastructure allows us to be able to meet our decarbonization goals. And we have the data and analytics through us, through the MPC and through others to show that we can leverage our existing infrastructure to meet our targets quickly and at less risk and more affordably for our consumers, more reliably for our consumers on a moving forward basis. So factoring this into decarb planning is so critically important. Next slide, please. This is really just summing up my entire presentation. And then last slide. This is sort of the AGA commitment to the path forward and how our industry is going to work with commissions, legislatures, et cetera, to enable reduction solutions in each of those areas. That's when I say the pathways, these are the pathways that I'm talking about, that we're looking on digging into and accelerating as we move forward. We're working on some great studies and supporting analytical work that should underpin this. And last slide, please. And then I have a whole bunch of links here for you to dig into if you want more information. But like I said, there's a lot to say and a lot to dig into, and I apologize for going over, but of course AGA is happy to be a resource on any one of these things and peel back the layers of the onion on any one of those topics in the future or as a one-off or whatever you may need from us. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks for trying to put as much as you can in a short amount of time. I know it's a lot, and like I said, I'm the worst in keeping time, but thank you so much for setting the table. And I'm just going to dive right in and go straight to Jerry Joseph from Énergir for his presentation.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here. As Ashley said, it's hard to keep all this information in within 15 minutes, but we'll try to be as effective as possible. I usually don't do these in English. We're very French speaking in Quebec, but I'll do my best job to be as clear as possible for you guys. So Jerry Joseph, Executive Director at Customer Experience at Énergir. I also lead two of our main initiatives on the demand side, which is dual energy and also the 100% renewable new connections. I'll give you guys a little bit more information on that. But I think it's important to just take a step back and look at what is Quebec and what is Énergir. So we can go to the next slide and we'll do this very quickly. But Énergir has essentially two areas where it works in the province in Quebec, where we distribute natural gas for 97% of the province. But we also do wind farms with our partners Boralex, and we also invest in the production of renewable natural gas with our partners Nature Energy from Denmark. But we're also present in Vermont, where we distribute most parts of the electricity and the natural gas in Vermont. Of course, most of our clientele are in Vermont, and of course, Green Mountain Power and Vermont Gas are very innovative on their side, but I'll be focusing more on the Quebec side since I work for the distribution of natural gas in Quebec. If we look at the next slide, the first important thing to state is that Quebec has a really distinct energy balance. So Quebec had the foresight in the 1960s to invest in the creation of Hydro-Québec, which is a state-owned electric distributor and production of electricity. So you can see that most of our energy, a good portion of our energy, 42%, comes from electricity. And that is for electricity is already 100% renewable. It's mostly hydroelectric, a little bit of wind farms and a little bit of solar, but it is 100% renewable. So we're not looking at decarbonizing the production of electricity. We're really looking now at decarbonizing the final use. You can also see that contrary to what we see in other states or any other province, a large percentage of Quebecers already heat with electricity. More than 80% of households heat with electricity. Unfortunately, a lot of them with the baseboards, which puts a lot of pressure on the electric network, but it's still something that's already decarbonized. The heating of buildings already largely decarbonized. What we do see is that there's still a lot of emissions that comes from petroleum products, And we can look at 43% of our emissions that come from the transport sector, another 31 that comes from the industrial, and only 10 that comes from the building sector. But energy has a big part to play because since it's hard to decarbonate transport, hard to decarbonate industrials, there's been a focus, an added focus put on the building sector, which energy represents 60% of the emissions in that sector, and the goals that we were not able to meet in other sectors like transport and industrial, we are, having higher objective for the building sector. So that's a little bit of a outlook of where we're placed in the energy balance. If we look at the next slide, what we'll see is that although there's a large portion of Quebecers that heat with electricity, and we're talking more than 4 million clients at Hydro-Québec, and we only have 215,000, and you can probably just click on the next slide so we can see the two again. Yes, thank you. We still represent a large portion of the peak demand and the energy distributed. So you have them separated in industrial and building sector. Industrial is essentially 4% of our clientele, and 96% are either residential, commercial, or institutional. So you can see that although we are a small player and a number of clients, we're still a large portion of the balance of an energy distributed compared to Hydro-Québec, which is the state-owned electric distributor. So decarbonizing our building sector, decarbonizing our economy is still going to be very difficult without having the infrastructure of the natural gas helping in that decarbonation. And this is a little bit where we place ourselves in that dynamic to be able to be part of the solution and transitioning past the carbon, to still be able to play a role past carbon neutrality, by 2050. If we look at what are our goals at Énergir, and we can look at that in the next slide, you'll see that we're very aggressive. So of course we have the same goal as the government does. By 2030, we want to reduce GHG emissions by 30% compared to 2020. But we're also looking in the building sector to be carbon neutral by 2040, and to be carbon neutral for all our activities by 2050. So these really are the goals that we're set, and we have very seriously put efforts into making sure that we have the tools necessary to be able to obtain those results. And what we've done this year that we haven't done in the past, and we could look at that in the next slide, is that we really traced our way into carbon neutrality. So what you can see here is our the energy, the natural gas that was distributed in 2022, where we think we're going to be in 2030, and where we're going to get in 2050. So what you can see there is that in the building sector, we are looking mostly, the reduction of volumes is going to come mostly from the building sector, where we're going to be looking at dual energy to reduce the consumption of natural gas and to be able to meet those GHG reduction goals. The plan is essentially come in, let's say we have 100 units of energy used in the building sector, to reduce that consumption from 100 to 30 through dual energy, and replace that 30% that's left with RNG, and to be able to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 and by 2040 for the building sector. What we are not sure when we look at the future, and you have the light blue section, but if you look at the portion for 2050, is we know that renewable natural gas is going to be playing a big role. What we don't know is the role that lower carbon hydrogen or carbon capture, what percentage of that mixture is going to be, the balance is going to be covered by one or the other of these two initiatives. But we do know that long term, both of them are going to be playing an important role in making sure we're able to meet carbon neutrality. So how are we going to meet those goals? How are we going to get to it? Well, you can look at this. If we look at this next slide, we have essentially four initiatives within our vision by 2030. The first one is to increase our efforts in energy efficiency. Énergir has been active in energy efficiency until 2001. We want to double up on those efforts. We give out about more than $33 million in grants yearly. We really want to be able to go even further in the next 8 years in order to double the efforts that we've done in the past. We'll look at that a little bit more. We've talked about dual energy, so work with the electric distributor to be able to use electricity in a way that is smart for decarbonation, but also doesn't put too much pressure on the electric network, and will create an increase in tariff that would be pretty heavy, and we'll look at that a little bit in detail a little bit further. We want to accelerate the injection of renewable natural gas, and we also want to diversify into new vectors. So Ashley talked about geothermal. We're looking at that. We're looking at hydrogen, carbon capture, and we're investing to see how exactly we can include those initiatives into our strategic planning within the next 2 decades. So our motto is the right energy at the right place, or the right place at the right time and at the best price. And this is really, really what guides us in the way we're looking at the future at Énergir. One thing that is clear, and if we look at the next slide, is that the network, the natural gas network infrastructure, has a role to play in making a smart transition through carbon neutrality. And this is a little bit what you see here. Essentially, the cost per ton of CO2 GHG reduction through different initiatives. So you have energy efficiency. As Ashley was saying, it is the lowest hanging fruit. It is the best return on investment for our clients, and we saw that year after year. We have RNG. We have the dual energy with RNG, and you have just the dual energy with fossil natural gas. And you can see that all of these initiatives have a better price than full electrification, or even only electrifying the peak. So that's really where we see the value long term. We see it in being able to address the winter peaks that we have in Quebec, addressing the transition in the transport, so long haul transport, being able to have natural gas replace diesel. And we see ourselves in the industrial sector, where we know high temperatures are needed, and often natural gas cannot be replaced by electrification. So if we dive a little bit deeper into the 4 initiative, and we could go to the next slide. As I said earlier, we want to double down our efforts on energy efficiency. Essentially, Énergir has 7 programs within our energy efficiency programs. So we go from making sure we have high efficiency equipment, to solutions for low income families, to renovation and new buildings, making sure that they meet they surpass the codes. We also have anything that has to do with commissioning, recommissioning, renewable, the preheating with solar, and also anything that has to do with innovations. Énergir has programs that encourages our clients to use those programs and to really save on their natural gas bill. What we've seen throughout the years is that a client that uses their energy efficiently is a client that we keep on the long term. So that's really the reason why we're pushing behind it and making sure that our programs are always up to date and meets the needs of our clients. If we look at this next slide, it's really based on the injection of renewable natural gas. So we've been injection success 2017. We do have a goal to have 10% of our natural gas that will come from renewable sources by 2030. We're in line right now. I think we have a little bit more than 7% that is contracted, and we're in line to be at 10% and even surpass that if the need be. We're looking at different scenarios, but clearly we're invested in making sure that we meet those goals. The 10% is regulated by our government. It's a minimum that we need to meet. So we really have the support of our government to make sure that we're able to put out the efforts in the necessary means to be able to reach that goal. One thing that we've done on the RNG side this year that's quite innovative, and I think it's certainly a first in North America, is to be able to meet our goals in the building sector. And we can see this in the next slide, is that since April 1st, we do ask our clients to use renewable natural gas if they want to get a connection in the building sector. all new clients either have the choice to be 100% renewable natural gas, all dual energy, and that really applies to every client in residential, commercial, or institutional sector. It does not apply to our industrial clients because we know of the dynamics and the pressure that would put in for those companies. But with the dual energy electricity RNG, when we look at when we compare the annual cost for our clients, it is very competitive to 100% electricity. It is even comparable to 100% natural gas because the tariff for dual energy on the electric side is really subsidized. It's a lot cheaper than it would be if you had the regular tariff. So that what's really makes it appealing. On top of that, of course, we have subsidies, but I'll look at that a little bit later in the next slides, and we can go to that right now. So the only other initiative program that we have is the dual energy initiative we have with Hydro-Québec. So the plan is it's fairly simple. So we use natural gas in winter peaks. One of the things we have to understand is that Montreal and probably some of the cities that you guys represent, but Montreal is in the top 3% of the coldest temperatures in the world. So we do have a climate that puts a lot of pressure on the electrical grid in the winter time. And making a full electrification of those buildings, although we represent a small margin, would cost a fortune in infrastructure because we would have to, invest massively. And that's really where the dual energy makes sense because we are able to reduce emissions by 70% with only using 30% of the power that's needed to supply those buildings and electricity. So we're able to create value with the gas network in those peak hours. And essentially what happens is that for every client that we convert to dual energy, we have the Hydro-Québec pays us, and it's essentially for peak shaving, but they pay us a contribution for every client that we convert to dual energy. And that makes it so that although we lose 70% of our volumes, we are able to keep 85 to 90% of the revenues. So that really makes sure that both on the electric side and both on the gas side, the rates hikes that it would create for a full electrification are lessened by the solution of a compromise that makes sure that both networks are able to be used in this optimal way. And if we look at the next slide, it really portrays the two choices that we had as a province. So you have the bottom, the full electrification. You can see that would have created a reduction of 750,000 tons of CO2. And if we look at the dual energy, we're about 540,000 tons. But what happens that by going through dual energy, as a society, we're able to save more than $1 billion, almost $2 billion, because we're able to limit the amount of new infrastructure that are needed to electrify the buildings using a portion of the power needed off peak. And we're able to use the natural gas network during peak to really serve those peak hours. So of course, we're not able to go and get the 750,000 tons of CO2 like we would in the scenario where we electrify at 100%, but we're able to get two-thirds of that, two-thirds of that. And if we combine it with the RNG, all of a sudden we're able to get to the same point without using another $2 billion of government funds or societal funds. And we're able to take those funds and concentrate them in other areas that are much harder to decarbonize, like this transport sector or the industrial sector. And what's also interesting is that we are able to, the technological solutions are mature. Heat pumps have been in the market for a number of years. It's solutions that we're able to deploy right away, and where we have more than 3,000 clients that have taken the decision to go to the dual energy route. And if we were looking to a full electrification, we would be looking at deploying a large number of infrastructural work, and it would have been hard to start really that transition before 2030. So with dual energy, we have something that works today, that's accessible, that makes the most of both networks, that make sure that clienteles of those two networks are protected through the compensation that is given through Energy and its clients throughout the years. And it's really a smart in between we find in order to be able to meet the reality of today. And if we go to the next slide, and this is a little bit of what I'm going to end on, that's a challenge, is finding the balance with costs being minimized as much. We know that all of our governments have a lot of pressure to keep their budgets as balanced as possible. Making sure we also have realisticity. Sorry, and we've been seeing more and more events, climate events, that being affecting the electrical network, that have made clients lose electricity for multiple days, and we have to maximize decarbonation. So having the natural gas network still playing a role past 2050 within a decarbonized world is really where we're trying to find our place. And I think that with the different tools we have, it's essentially where we're going to be at. So that was quickly what I had to give you.
You did a great job. And I think you ended it on a really nice note. Like, that's the $1 million question, how to find that balance, right? And that's what we're all trying to do. I'm going to kick it off to your Uri from Southern California Gas Company. And don't worry about the 2 o'clock cutoff. I have thrown myself at the mercy of NARUC and Brattle, and we can go over 2 o'clock for the presentations and Q&A while we have our panelists here.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Catherine. And it's my pleasure to present to this audience. Thank you for the opportunity. And what I'd like to talk about is what we in California are doing with regards to decarbonization, and especially with regards to hydrogen, which is my area of responsibility within Southern California Gas. Next slide, please. Thank you. To recap, the state of California is strongly and consistently committed to decarbonization. There's legislature at the state level that stays the course, and there are laws in the books which are driving actions across the public and private sector. What is notable is that for the last several years, hydrogen has taken a more and more prominent role in these plans, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that's taken place. But just some of the examples here from the CARB, California Air Resources Board Scoping Plan, which has been issued every 5 years, and from the Integrated Energy Policy Report, IPER, which is issued every 2 years. Both speak very clearly and strongly about the need for clean hydrogen to supplement electrification to achieve deep, resilient, and cost-effective decarbonization of the state. Next slide, please. There's a lot of words here, and I apologize for the small font size. Maybe the one point I would make is actually the last bullet point on this slide, is where I think what we hear a lot across various geographies, across various states, and frankly, across various locations globally, is this increasing need for resiliency, which I think is a topic which is going to be with us for quite some time. And that resiliency has multiple levels. We observe the need for the national resiliency and dependencies, which we need to find ways to mitigate, whether it's rare earth metals or whether it's just energy interdependence. But we also observe in California that resiliency need at a very local level, where supply is going to become more volatile as the share of intermittent renewables is in the mix is going to grow. And at the same time, demand is likely to become more volatile as well in a warming world, with weather events that scientists forecast may become more prolonged and more violent. And that even before the recent expectations of the sharp upswing in energy demand due to the AI and the data centers. So clearly need for long-term storage of large amounts of energy is going to be increasing. in the future. And that's where I believe, in spite of all the differences, again, regionally, in terms of the resource mix, the distinctions, I think what got hydrogen to take such a prominent spot among the energy sources is its ability to serve as this long-term storage solution, if you will. Let's go to the next slide, please, to talk a little bit more about the California specifics and what who we are and why we think we can play an important role in adoption of hydrogen. Southern California Gas Company has been around for more than 150 years. We are large, by many metrics, the largest gas utility in North America, perhaps in the Western Hemisphere, with a very massive footprint of pipelines. If you add all of our lines, including house lines, then it adds up to more than 100,000 miles of pipe. And I'll talk a little bit later about one aspect of how this is important, but just the overall notion of using this infrastructure in place to enable affordable decarbonization is very important to us, because I think many of us would share the observation that in the energy business, repurposing existing assets, it's typically more cost effective. It also can be more expedient than building things from scratch. So brownfield, in our experience, mostly, if not always, beats greenfield. And that's why we owe it to our ratepayers to examine ways in which we can use our footprint, our assets, our workforce, our competencies to continue to serve the low and eventually zero carbon fuels to our customers, just like we serve natural gas to them today. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is a very, very schematic level vision of our network by mid-century. And what, again, complexity here is not intended. The key point of this slide is that we expect the decarbonization on a molecular level will take various paths, and these paths will be deeply complementary to each other rather than competing. There will be clearly existing natural gas pipelines where we are going to be able to bring blend of hydrogen, and we'll talk about our work on blending a little bit later. There'll be new hydrogen pipelines, because the large amounts of hydrogen that we all expect to be produced and consumed will require dedicated pipeline infrastructure. We believe that there'll be existing natural gas pipelines, which will continue to carry natural gas with an increasing proportion of renewable natural gas in it. And ultimately, there will also need to be carbon capture and sequestration, which, as multiple studies suggest, is an important pathway of decarbonization in locations where fundamentals are appropriate. And California clearly is one of those locations with large amount of existing oil and gas fields, with large amount of infrastructure which is suitable for sequestration of carbon dioxide. Let's go to the next slide, please. One of the projects that we are developing, perhaps the most externally visible project, is Angeles Link. That's our green hydrogen pipeline. And again, we are coming from the notion that to decarbonize California effectively, we will need millions of tons of hydrogen per year. That is not just our analysis. Multiple entities, including the state-supported entities, have come to the same conclusion. And another fact in California is that large amounts, such as what would be needed of hydrogen in California, are going to be produced far away from load centers. They're going to be produced in areas with abundant land, cost-effective land, and that means that there's a transportation need from those areas where the development activity is already underway to load centers. And largest by far the load center in our service territory is Los Angeles, what we call the Los Angeles Basin, which includes, of course, the city of Los Angeles, which includes the heavy industry, which, by the way, is quite substantial, Los Angeles is the largest heavy manufacturing area in the country. This area also includes power plants that serve this load, and it also importantly includes port, which is on a combined basis. Los Angeles and the Long Beach port is the largest in the nation, among the 10th largest in the world, and tremendous load over there. So to supply this need to decarbonize all these multiple sectors, and the sectors in our view include transportation, power generation, and industrial load. To decarbonize these sectors, we need to bring large amounts of hydrogen to Los Angeles, and that's why we are developing the large hydrogen pipeline project. We are now in phase 1 of this project. We are submitting our reports, which we were authorized to prepare by the Commission, to the Commission later this year, and we are looking forward to robust discussions with our stakeholders. We have been engaged with many of them through the process of creation of public advisory group and community benefits organization. And by now it's been a very extensive, very deep process where we were able to hear and take feedback from multiple parties with regards to our development process and our results. Next slide, please. Complementary to work on dedicated hydrogen pipeline is our work on hydrogen blending. This work has begun quite some time ago. We have been collaborating with the University of California, Irvine for years now, and they've demonstrated blending of hydrogen into their campus network several years ago. We need to make next steps and explore blending of hydrogen across our system. We were authorized and in fact requested to do so by the Commission. And so we and other utilities earlier this year in March submitted proposals to execute blending projects to examine blending of hydrogen across the range of materials, across the range of conditions. And blending is important for multiple reasons. First of all, of course, blending of hydrogen displaces fossil fuel natural gas and through that decreases carbon footprint. What is also really important, and it gained more importance recently, is that the hydrogen development in North America and the United States is going to require both supply and demand. And federal government, which has supported supply through the pieces of federal legislation, such as the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, recently turned to the need to shore up demand, because the fact is that hydrogen today is still relatively expensive. And for incentives on the demand side, the government actually allocated $1 billion, and now the Department of Energy is working on that. What we are working on can be a very material element of this demand, because mathematically, the blending of even low concentration hydrogen into large networks such as ours is going to create large scale demand rather quickly. And that, in our view, is a very promising way to create demand for clean hydrogen, because ultimately, to bring down the cost of clean hydrogen, you need to learn how to produce it effectively, which is the function of scale. And that's what the federal government incentives are directed on the supply side, but we need to create the same scale on the demand side to make sure that the scale actually will materialize. And then, of course, another element of delivering that hydrogen cost effectively is transportation distribution, which is, again, going back to Angela's link, why we are developing the dedicated infrastructure to enable that. So blending, we believe, is very important to us, and we are awaiting for the Commission's decisions after our filing, which we made earlier this year. Let's go to the last slide. Thank you. And so to recap where we are as a company, we pursue a range of pathways to decarbonize. We firmly believe, and I know my previous fellow panelists have mentioned this in detail, that It's the multiplicity of pathways. It's their complementarity, which is going to result in success, which is going to allow us to find this elusive balance between these three legs of the proverbial stool that Jay articulated so well: the decarbonization, affordability, and energy resiliency. Finding this balance is going to be hard, but the multiplicity of solutions, multiplicity of pathways in our way is the optimal way of approaching this complex problem. And so we are working on dedicated pipelines. We are working on range of clean fuels initiative. Blending is one of them, but we're also very committed to RNG, and we have our internal RNG goals. We also work on carbon capture and sequestration and a number of other initiatives. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you our work and look forward to a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you